March 2021. I'm in a parking garage on South Tryon Street in Uptown Charlotte. I have a presentation folder under my arm, a pitch meeting in 20 minutes, and exactly $43 in my checking account. Not 4,300. 43. That morning, before I left the apartment, Lily was at the kitchen table with her crayons. She was 6 years old and very serious about her art. She held up a drawing before I could get to the door. 4 figures, crayon on notebook paper. "That's you," she said, pointing to the tall one. "That's me." She pointed to the small one. I asked about the other 2. "Mama," she said, "and Grandma in heaven." I told her it was beautiful. I told her I'd be back for dinner. Then I drove to Uptown Charlotte and parked in a garage on South Tryon Street with $43 in my account. My name is Marcus Webb. My wife Emma passed away 18 months before this story starts. Pancreatic cancer, 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Before that, we'd spent 2 years running toward her. Every consult, every treatment, every number we prayed would flip in our favor. When she was gone, she left behind a daughter who still drew her into every family picture, and a husband who had burned through every dollar they'd built together. Medical bills have a way of doing that. So I was selling supplemental life insurance door to door for a company called Pinnacle Financial Partners. I had my Series 63 license, a territory, and a box of business cards that said independent agent in a font that was maybe a size too large. Pinnacle gave me a lead system. People who'd filled out an online form 2 years ago and had no memory of it. And I drove around the Charlotte suburbs in my 2016 Civic trying to turn strangers into clients. The pitch meeting on the 14th floor was for a property management company's HR director. My play was to get their employees enrolled in an income protection package. The HR director's name was Mr. Parrish, and I had never met him, and I had done this exact pitch 14 times in the past 4 weeks. I'd closed twice, but that morning Lily had asked for cheddar bunnies from Harris Teeter, so I was going up to the 14th floor. Except I didn't go up to the 14th floor, because the receptionist called down to tell me Mr. Parrish had been pulled into an all-day off-site. Would I like to reschedule? I told her absolutely, thank you, have a great week. Then I walked back to my Civic and sat in the driver's seat for 11 minutes without moving. That's when I heard it. The kind of sound a parking garage makes when something that doesn't belong shows up. A low mechanical snarl, clean tires squeaking on concrete. A red Ferrari. I don't know the model. I know nothing about cars except whether they start. But it parked in a visitor spot 2 spaces from my Civic. And a man got out who looked about 50, suit jacket over a dress shirt, no tie, carrying a phone to his ear, and a coffee he'd clearly been carrying for a while. He was in the middle of a conversation he seemed finished with even as he was having it. He hung up. He looked at my Civic, then at me. "Rough morning?" he said. I guess it was still on my face. "Reschedule," I said. He nodded. "You selling something?" He glanced at the folder. "Life insurance, small business packages mostly." He thought about it. "Tough sell right now. Post-COVID, everybody's restructuring benefits. Nobody wants a new line item." He wasn't being unkind. He was just right. "Yeah," I said. He pulled out his keys, paused. "You always pitch in parking garages?" I don't know why, but I laughed at that. "A real one." 14th floor. They canceled on me." He smiled. He told me his name was Daniel Cross. He was heading to a lunch meeting 8 blocks north on College Street. He had a car service scheduled, but canceled it. "Parking's actually easier than I expected today." He glanced at the Ferrari. Then he looked at me a beat longer than I expected. "Walk up with me," he said. We walked up South Tryon in the kind of March cold that Charlotte does. Not serious cold, just enough to remind you spring isn't done making you wait. He asked about my background. I told him 8 years in sales, started at a dealership, moved to financial products 3 years ago after getting my insurance license, married a teacher, lost her, have a daughter. He listened to all of it. I asked what he did. Wealth management, he said. Private clients, institutional accounts. I read the market the way you'd read a newspaper and try to be right more than I'm wrong. Is the pay good? He almost smiled. It can be. We got to the building on College Street, and he shook my hand at the door. He took a card from his jacket pocket. Cross Capital Management, Suite 2200, 2 Wells Fargo Center. I looked at it. I looked up at the building. Then I said, I'll call you. I walked back to my Civic. I sat in the driver's seat, and I looked at his card for a long time. And I thought, the gap between that man and me is not intelligence. It's not education. It's not even time. It's a decision. A single committed decision he made that I hadn't made yet. I know how that sounds. I know every person who's ever driven past something nice has convinced themselves the universe was sending them a message. Maybe it was. Maybe I was just desperate. Probably both. But I had a 6-year-old girl drawing her mother in heaven into every family picture, and $43 wasn't going to be enough. 3 days before I called Daniel Cross, on a Wednesday afternoon, I was sitting on a bench outside Eastover Elementary, waiting for the 3:20 bell. I had that day's Charlotte Observer folded in my lap, and I was working the crossword. In pen. The woman next to me glanced over twice. On the third glance, she said, "You're not worried about getting it wrong?" "Not really," I said. She watched me fill in 4 more answers before the doors opened. She went back to her phone. I put the paper in my bag, took Lily's hand, and we walked to the car. Emma had started it. Not the crossword. She always said she was bad at crosswords. But the pen. We used to do the Sunday puzzle at the kitchen table, and I'd reach for a pencil and she'd push it away. "If you're not certain enough to do it in ink, why are you doing it at all?" She was gone. But the pen stayed. I kept going every day. It was just a thing I did. I didn't think anything of it. I called Daniel Cross on a Thursday morning. He remembered me. He said, "Come in Friday at noon. I've got 15 minutes." I wore the charcoal gray suit, the one I'd bought for Emma's cousin's wedding in 2018, and I walked into 2 Wells Fargo Center and took the elevator to the 22nd floor. His office had a view of Bank of America Stadium from the west-facing window. Charlotte looked different from up there, like something that could be reached. He told me about the trainee program, a 6-month development track, unpaid, leading to a Series 7 examination. 20 applicants in the current intake cycle, 2 final positions. He did not offer me a spot. He explained the application process. Then he said something I kept. The people who make it through this program are not always the smartest candidates. They're the ones who don't stop moving. I drove home, picked up Lily, made mac and cheese, put her to bed, and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad. I wrote down what I needed to do. I wrote down who I was going to be. 20 candidates, 2 positions. I was going to be one of them. I was already certain of that. You can call it confidence or arrogance or delusion, but I was certain the way you're certain when you have no alternative. When the other options have all been ruled out, and this is the only road left. I didn't realize, yet, what was standing in the way. The plan was specific. That's important. The specificity of it. 3 months of insurance income to build a cash cushion. I'd work every lead I had, twice, mornings and evenings. I'd pick up Uber and Lyft shifts on Friday and Saturday nights after Lily was asleep. My neighbor Ms. Patton had offered to be my on-call babysitter for a year, and I'd never used her. This was the year. I'd submit the application to Cross Capital's trainee program that week. During the 6-month program, I'd run the rideshare hustle to keep cash flowing, and I would, non-negotiable, no exceptions, pick up Lily from after-school care at 5:30 every single day. 3 months of runway, a night hustle, 5:30 every day, 2 positions out of 20. That was the plan. I said it out loud at the kitchen table. I wrote it on the legal pad. I folded the legal pad and put it in the pocket of the charcoal suit. The kind of plan you build at midnight always looks different in morning light. But I'd built it. And knowing exactly what you're trying to do is worth more than people admit. I was 4 weeks into the plan before it was gone. Pinnacle Financial Partners sent a letter on a Tuesday evening informing me that they were suspending independent agent operations in the Southeast region effective in 14 days, pending a regulatory review. My pending commissions, $4,100 I'd been counting on from policies already placed, were frozen. My agent agreement was terminated. My territory, gone. I sat at the kitchen table and read that letter 3 times. Then I put it face down. Emma would have known what to say, not a speech. She didn't do speeches, something specific and real, something that pointed forward. But she wasn't here. The refrigerator hummed. 3 days after the letter, my landlord called. He'd sold the building to a developer converting it to short-term rentals. All tenants had 60 days to vacate. I was already 2 months behind on rent, so the 60 days was, in practice, considerably shorter. My account had $312 in it. My pending insurance commissions were frozen in a corporate dispute I had no power over. Pinnacle's hotline had a recorded message, and I left 2 voicemails that went nowhere. But the application was in at Cross Capital. That was still in motion. The Uber account was still active. I had the suit, so not nothing, just very close to nothing. Daniel Cross agreed to a coffee before the formal application review, a thing he did occasionally for candidates he'd personally introduced, he said. We met at Amelie's on East 7th Street on a Friday morning. Mismatched furniture, blackboard menu, the smell of espresso and something baked. The kind of place that felt designed for conversations that matter. We ordered. He asked about my background again, more carefully this time. The drinks were slow to come. Without thinking about it, I reached into my bag and took out the newspaper. Pulled the crossword, started filling it in. Daniel watched. I worked through maybe 6 clues in 3 minutes, in pen. How many letters? He said. I looked up. What? 14 across, how many? I looked at the grid. 9. But I already got it from the intersecting words. Determined. He looked at me. You do that every day? Every day. In pen? Yeah. He was quiet for a moment. Why? I thought about the right answer. Then I said the true one. My wife taught me. She said, if you're not certain enough to do it in ink, why are you doing it at all? He didn't say anything for a long moment. He picked up his phone and sent a message I couldn't see. Then, the formal review panel meets in 3 weeks. I'm going to make sure you're in the room. I walked out of Amelie's onto East 7th and stood in the morning cold and thought about Emma saying that. The whole logic of it. The commitment, the refusal to hedge, the decision to be wrong in front of people rather than write in pencil, the willingness to show your hand. Do it in ink. She never knew she was teaching me something about this. The panel interview was on a Thursday. I'd been sleeping in my car for 6 days by then. The landlord had started the eviction process before the 60 days were up. I was behind on rent, and he knew I had no leverage. My belongings were in a storage unit on the east side. Lily's bed, her books, a box of Emma's things I couldn't bring myself to sort through. Lily was at Emma's sister Carol's place in Mint Hill during the week. I told Carol I was finalizing a lease on a new apartment, and she'd given me a key and a look that said she wasn't asking further questions. At least, not yet. I drove to Carol's every morning at 7, took Lily to school, then drove to whatever library branch or coffee shop would tolerate me for a few hours on one purchase. I had a Planet Fitness membership, $20 a month, paid in January, and I used the shower every morning before anything else. I had 3 dress shirts on hangers in the back seat of the Civic. On the morning of the panel interview, I was at Planet Fitness at 6. Showered, dressed at the car, tie checked in the rearview mirror. I drove to 2 Wells Fargo Center and arrived 30 minutes early. I sat in the lobby, and I did the crossword. There were 4 other candidates in the waiting area. Briefcases, nice bags, all of them on phones. I had a newspaper. The panel was 4 people, including Daniel. The lead interviewer was a woman named Alicia Torres, who had the kind of stillness that tells you she's heard every pitch ever made and is waiting patiently for the first one that doesn't sound like every other pitch. She looked at my resume and then at me. She asked where I was currently working. I told her Pinnacle had folded and I was between situations. She asked how long. 3 weeks, I said. She asked what I'd been doing in the meantime. Staying ready, I said. She wrote something on her notepad. I got the call 2 days later. I was in the Planet Fitness parking lot eating a granola bar for dinner when my phone rang. Daniel Cross, 2 trainees selected. I was one of them. I said thank you. Then I called Carol and asked if I could take Lily for dinner. We went to Waffle House on Independence Boulevard, and she got chocolate chip waffles and told me about a frog she'd seen on the playground, describing it with the scientific authority that 6-year-olds use for frogs and dinosaurs. I ate eggs, and I thought, okay, don't stop now. Here's what's hard to explain to someone who hasn't been there. I want to say it was manageable. I want to say the system made it feel like something other than what it was. And there was a system. But the system was this: park somewhere safe before 11, sleep when you can, be clean by 7, pick up Lily by 3:30, be back at Cross Capital by 8 the next morning. The Civic became everything. Front seat was the office, laptop on the dash mount, folders on the passenger seat, phone charger permanently plugged in. Back seat was where I slept, folded against the window with my jacket as a pillow. Trunk had the gym bag, the extra shirts on hangers, a box of granola bars, and a 2-liter of water. I rotated 3 parking spots: a church lot off Monroe Road that emptied after Wednesday night service, the Walmart on Central Avenue, a quiet, dead-end street in Cotswold. I found by accident one evening when I made a wrong turn, and the neighborhood was dark and still, and nobody was asking questions. Lily didn't know. That was the line I was defending every day. That specific line. She was at Carol's on school nights. On weekends when I could manage a motel room for 2 nights on the credit card I was 60 days past due on, I had her with me. On weekends I couldn't. We drove somewhere. Crowder's Mountain, the Kids Museum on North Tryon, the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And I paid admission on the card, and we spent the whole day together, and it was completely real and completely ours, and I have no regrets about any of it. But the weight of it. That's what people don't tell you. Not the cold, not the embarrassment. The weight of maintaining the shape of a normal life when the actual structure underneath is gone. Every conversation with Carol, every morning at Planet Fitness, every time Lily asked when she could come home. Soon, I'd say. We're waiting on the new place to be ready. She believed me every time. That nearly broke me more than anything else did. It was a Tuesday night in October, about 2 months into the trainee program, when it got to its worst. I'd worked an Uber shift the night before, Sunday into Monday, 3 in the morning. I'd slept maybe 3 hours before my alarm went off, and I'd gotten through Monday on coffee and stubbornness. On Tuesday afternoons, I picked Lily up directly from Carol's, our arrangement, and we drove to the library on Sharon Amity Road, where she had a book report due Thursday. We worked on it in the front seat of the Civic with the heat running, her notes spread across the passenger seat, and her reading the good parts to me while I helped her find the argument. When she fell asleep in the back seat, I drove. I was heading for the Walmart lot, but when I got there, every spot in the overnight section was taken. A church group, a cluster of vans, too many people moving around in the sodium light. I didn't want to deal with it. Not tonight. I drove east on Independence for a while. I drove past the motel I'd used the last 2 weekends, but the vacancy sign was off, and I had $14 in my account, and the credit card was at its limit. At 11:43, I pulled into a Denny's on South Boulevard. I carried Lily in from the car. She woke halfway up, looked at the fluorescent lights, the laminated menus, the woman behind the counter. "Are we getting pancakes?" she said. "Hot chocolate first," I said. I settled her into the corner booth, the one in the back near the window that looked out onto the parking lot. She was asleep again inside of 4 minutes, stretched across the vinyl seat with her coat folded under her head. I ordered a coffee. Black. I took out my Series 7 study materials, a spiral-bound practice exam booklet I'd bought used from a woman in Dilworth who'd taken the test 2 years earlier, and I spread it on the table. The restaurant was almost empty, a cook behind the counter doing something quiet with a rag, an older man at the counter eating eggs and reading the news on his phone, 3 college-age kids in a booth across the room talking in voices low enough not to carry, Christmas music from a speaker near the door, very faint, barely there. It wasn't Christmas yet, but someone on the morning shift had apparently made the call, and nobody on the evening shift had reversed it. I opened the booklet to options pricing. The relationship between a call option and its strike price. A section I'd gotten wrong 3 times this week, each time in a different way. At 12:30, the waitress came by and refilled my coffee without asking. Her name tag said, Greta. She looked at the study materials. She looked at Lily, asleep across the booth. She didn't say anything. She refilled the cup and moved on. I worked through the options section. I got it wrong again, differently. At 1:15, she came back and refilled again. She set down a small plate without a word. 2 pieces of toast, no butter asked for, no mention of it. She placed it in front of me the way you put something in front of a person you don't want to embarrass. Quietly, without making it anything other than toast. I ate it. At 2 in the morning, Lily shifted in her sleep and her coat slid to the floor. I picked it up and tucked it back around her without waking her. I sat back down. I looked at her face. She had Emma's mouth, the way her lips parted slightly in sleep, the way her face went soft in a way it didn't during waking hours. I used to watch Emma sleep in those last months, just to memorize it. The exact way her breath would slow, the exact weight of her quiet. I thought, she would have hated this. Not at me, not in a sharp way. Emma's version of anger pointed forward, not backward. She would have sat in this booth and looked at our daughter sleeping, and she would have said, "What are we doing next?" Calm. Like it was a real question with an answer. Like the answer was already obvious and I just needed to find it. I pulled the crossword out of my bag. I'd been carrying it since morning, barely touched. First time in years, I looked at it. I picked up my pen. I started filling it in. 43 across, resolve, 7 down, persistent. The clues felt like they were written directly to the situation, which they weren't. They never are. But at 2 in the morning in a Denny's with your daughter asleep across the booth, everything feels like it's aimed at you. I filled in the last answer at 2:47 in the morning. The whole thing. In pen. Not one crossing error. At 3:20, Greta refilled my cup a 3rd time. She looked at the completed crossword on the table. She looked at me. I don't know what I looked like. She said, without any particular inflection, "You gonna be okay?" "Yes," I said. I meant it. For the first time in a while, I actually meant it. Lily woke up when the morning crew came in at 5:15, and the restaurant got louder. She looked around at the fluorescent lights, the coffee cups, the pale morning coming in through the window. She looked at me. "Did we sleep here?" "We were here for breakfast," I said. "Early start." She considered this. "Can I have pancakes now?" I had $14. Pancakes were $4.99. "Yeah," I said, "you can have pancakes." Here's what nobody tells you about the bottom. Once you've actually been there, you stop being afraid of it. Not reckless, not careless. But fear operates on the assumption that there's somewhere lower you haven't been yet. Once you've slept in a Denny's booth, while your daughter slept across the vinyl from you and a stranger put toast in front of you without asking. Once you've lived through a whole night on South Boulevard and still shown up to a brokerage on the 22nd floor of Two Wells Fargo Center at 7:30 with a pressed shirt and a pen. The anxiety about falling loses its grip. I got quieter, not sad quiet, focused quiet. I built a system at Cross Capital the same way I'd built the car system. Nothing to spare, no room for waste. In by 7:30, phone on by 7:40. Every lead noted, the time of the call, the exact hesitation in the voice, the specific word used when someone said no. Most people in sales hear no and move on. I heard no and listened for which kind of no it was. There are at least 6 different kinds, and they mean 6 different things about when to call back and what to say when you do. Daniel Cross walked past my desk on a Thursday morning and stopped. He stood there watching me for a full minute while I was mid-call. I didn't look up. When I hung up, he said, "How many today?" 51, I said. 7 callbacks scheduled. He nodded. He started to leave. Then he stopped. "Come to lunch." We went to a sandwich counter in the lobby. He bought. He didn't make anything of it. He talked about building a client book, about patience, about compound trust. "Your first 100 clients are the hardest," he said. "But client 70 refers client 71. Client 90 knows someone client 80 mentioned you to. You're not building a list, you're building a network. Networks grow on their own once they're real." I thought about that on the drive to Carol's that evening to pick up Lily. So I called 2 of my callback numbers just to ask a follow-up question. Not to close, just to stay present, just to keep the line alive. That month, I was the top contact volume trainee in the cohort, by a margin that made the other trainees ask questions. Somewhere in November, I can't give you an exact date, which is how I know it was real, something shifted. I'd been running on the plan. The backpack, the specific sequence I'd built at the kitchen table 9 months earlier. 3 months of runway, 5:30 every day, 2 positions out of 20. I'd measured myself against it every morning. Am I on track? Am I behind? Am I surviving? And then one morning I got to the office at 7:20, made my first call at 7:32, and I realized I hadn't checked the plan in 3 days. Not because I'd abandoned it, because I'd become it. I wasn't executing a strategy anymore. I was just working. The calls, the follow-ups, the client meetings Daniel had started inviting me to, the way I was beginning to read the markets the way he'd described, like a newspaper, pattern after pattern after pattern. None of it felt like effort. It felt like who I was. I thought about something Emma said near the end, when I was scared about what came after. After her, after everything. She said, "You don't have to be good at something before it becomes part of you. You just have to keep doing it long enough." She was talking about being a father. I think she was talking about everything. I'd spent 9 months holding the destination in front of me like a target. The job, the office, the position, the Ferrari on Tuesday. I'd been measuring myself against it every day the way you measure a wound, waiting for it to close. But finish lines are only useful while you're still running toward them. I wasn't running anymore. The crystal ball I'd set up in my own head, if he can do it, I can do it, had been about becoming something I wasn't yet. But somewhere between the Denny's booth and the 50th call on a Friday afternoon, I'd stopped waiting to become the thing I was trying to become. I already was it. That was the moment. Not the panel interview, not the offer. This quiet Tuesday morning on the 22nd floor of 2 Wells Fargo Center, when I realized I'd stopped being afraid. The 6th month ended on a Wednesday. 3 weeks before it ended, I'd moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side. $740 a month, mattress on the floor, Lily's toddler bed set up in the single bedroom. On the Saturday, we moved her out of Carol's. We drove together to the storage unit and carried her stuffed animals and her books, and a lamp Emma had bought at a flea market in Asheville. Lily arranged everything on the windowsill with the seriousness of someone designing something permanent. On Wednesday, I put on the charcoal gray suit. I drove to 2 Wells Fargo Center. I was in the lobby at 8. I did the crossword. At 3 o'clock, Alicia Torres asked me to the conference room on the east side of the floor, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the long oval table, and a view that looked out over the whole city. Daniel was there. 2 senior partners. Alicia at the head of the table with a yellow legal pad. She said my name. She said they'd reviewed the full cohort. Contact volume, conversion rates, Series 7 preparation scores, client feedback, and what she called presence. The harder-to-measure quality of someone who moves like they belong somewhere and acts accordingly. Then she said, "We'd like to offer you a permanent position." I was looking at the table when she said it. Not at her. I don't know what I was looking at. The grain of the wood, the straight line of it. I looked up, I said, "Thank you." 2 words. I had imagined this moment for 9 months, since the parking garage, since the walk up South Tryon, since the crossword at Amelie's. I'd built a whole version of this scene in my head. In the real version, I said thank you, and then I went very quiet, and I looked out the window at the Charlotte skyline and at Bank of America Stadium below, and I thought about Emma for exactly 4 seconds, and then I stood and shook every hand in the room. I got into the elevator alone. The doors closed. I did not hold it together. Not even close. I walked through the lobby, through the revolving door, and out onto Trade Street. And a man in a delivery vest was coming the other way, and I stopped him. A complete stranger. He looked startled. I said, "I'm sorry, I just needed to tell somebody. I got the job." He looked at me. He looked at the suit. He said, "Yeah? That's great, man. Good for you." That was it. He went inside. I stood on Trade Street in the November cold, and I breathed. I drove to Eastover Elementary School. It was 3:17 when I parked. The bell rang at 3:20. I stood outside by the pickup fence. I didn't go back to the car, I just stood there with my hands in my jacket pockets. And when the doors opened and the kids came out, I found Lily in the middle of them. She was wearing her purple backpack, and she was carrying something in front of her at arm's length the way kids do when they're protecting something they made. She was looking at it, concentrating. She hadn't seen me yet. I called her name. She looked up. The drawing dropped to her side and she ran. I caught her. I picked her up, and she wrapped her arms around my neck, and she smelled like crayons and whatever the cafeteria had made for lunch, and I stood there on the sidewalk outside Eastover Elementary holding her, and I thought, this is it. This is the whole thing right here. This exact weight in my arms is the whole reason. She pulled back after a moment and held up the drawing. A house. The apartment, I think, based on the window. 2 figures out front, one tall and one small, standing close together. "For the fridge," she said. "Absolutely for the fridge," I said. I buckled her into the back seat. I got in the front. I looked at her in the rearview mirror. I thought about Emma. Not in the broken way, in the good way. In the way where you can feel someone so specifically and so clearly that it's almost like they're present. I thought about that kitchen table, that Sunday crossword, that pen. If you're not certain enough to do it in ink, why are you doing it at all? I was doing it in ink, all of it. Every day. That's the whole story. A man in a parking garage with $43 and a canceled meeting, a red Ferrari, a crossword in pen, a daughter who drew 4 figures and then 2, a night at a Denny's on South Boulevard, and a woman named Greta who refilled a cup without asking. The man I used to be thought happiness was a destination, something you arrived at once the hard part was finished. I know now it was never out there. It was in the crossword at 2:47 in the morning. It was in the toast Greta put down without saying a word. It was in Lily asking for pancakes after we'd slept in a restaurant booth. It was in Emma's voice every time I picked up a pen. It was here the whole time. I just had to stop waiting for permission to feel it. If any part of this story found you where you are right now, drop it in the comments. Not what you thought of the video. Tell me what you're in the middle of, what you're building toward, what your version of that parking garage looks like. Those comments are why this channel exists. If this was worth something to you, share it with someone who's in the middle of their own version of this. And if you're not subscribed, come join us. We'll have something new for you in a couple of days. Stay in the fight.